Hi everybody. Today we are going to spend a little bit of time going over the frequently asked questions that we get when it comes to reactivity, focus, and distractions and everything like that. So we have been talking a lot about building focus and working around distractions the last few weeks, and we get a lot of the same questions, which is good. And so I thought we would just kind of do an FAQ on focus building, reactivity, and that kind of thing. So if you have any questions at all during this live, throw them into the comments and I will answer them. And then if you're watching the replay, you can of course still throw your questions into the comments because I will answer them as well later on. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about quickly, kind of before I jump into these, is one of the reasons that we started talking about focus and distractions is because a lot of people were talking about and asking for help with their dogs who bark in public. So the industry term would be reactive. You have a reactive dog if there are things he barks at. If he sees another dog and he starts to bark, if he sees another person and he starts to bark, something like that, we would call that reactivity. And this is a really big topic. So we tried to start by talking about just building focus, because that really is the foundation for stopping that reactivity behavior. So the couple of things that I wanted to talk about quickly in this live is that if your dog is reactive, if you're having that barking experience in public, then you really need to go back and watch all the lives we've done in this last month again and apply all of that stuff. So we're actually going to be doing a full web course in this, a full web course on this topic inside the Academy Wednesday. This Wednesday will be our first web class. And so, of course, to get access to that, that's inside the Academy, so that's for our members, and there's going to be a full web class just on reactivity. Because it's a really big topic, and I need to be able to share videos with you and share case studies and things like that. But when it comes to reactivity, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. So first of all, you need to take all the information that I've given you in the last few lives. So we've talked about focus around distractions, calmness, we've talked about distance, the intensity level of the distractions, all of that stuff. And you need to really think that through and apply that to your reactivity. So if my dog barks when he sees other dogs, one of the easiest things to do is play the distraction mark treat game and with other dogs. But what you have to do is you have to start far enough away that your dog won't bark at them. So the biggest tip I have for you if your dog is reactive is I have 3 tips. Why don't we'll do that. We'll go through my 3 top tips if your dog is reactive, and then know that there's that web class coming on Wednesday inside the Academy if you want more information. So my top 3 tips, other than watch all the lives we've already done because they will help you, is 1 is DMT, distraction mark treat. We talked about that in a previous video. And you want to do that a lot, okay? But tip number 2 is that you need to be far enough away. So you have to start playing distraction mark treat far enough away that your dog isn't barking in the first place. So that might be 20 feet, that might be 100 feet, that might be 300 feet. But you have to start far enough away that your dog doesn't bark and then slowly move closer, only as your dog is being successful. And this is where the ABCs comes in, so where we want to talk about really defining the behavior. I think we've talked about the antecedent behavior consequence in a Facebook Live, but if we haven't, I'll go over it really quickly now. So behavior analysts, they talk about behaviors in terms of their ABCs. So we have the antecedent, the thing that happens before the behavior itself, and then the consequence for the behavior. And if your dog is reactive, tip number 3 is you need to understand the ABC for your dog. So the behavior is where I always start. That's the behavior you're seeing. And you need to define that. So saying my dog is reactive it's not a good enough definition. We really need to operationalize it. We really need to define what you mean by reactive. So you want to define what the behavior is, what it looks like, things like how far away you have to be. So an appropriate description for a behavior would be something along the lines of, my dog begins barking, but my dog barks continuously until the other dog leaves. That could be the behavior. The consequence for the behavior is what happens directly after the behavior. So maybe that dog leaves, maybe that dog comes closer. The antecedent is the part where what happens right before the behavior. What sets the scene to make the behavior happen or to trigger the behavior? Because consequences are actually what make the behavior happen. So an antecedent for reactivity might be dog appears 20 feet away. So in my ABCs, if my dog is reactive, my antecedent might be a dog appears 20 feet away. The behavior is my dog continues to bark until the dog leaves. And the consequence might be the dog leaves, for example. Now, you really need to understand that ABC because you don't get to control the behavior, okay? You don't have any control over the behavior. Only your dog does. You have control over the antecedent and you have control over the consequence. So what my new ABC might look like is, let's say I'm going to control the antecedent and I'm going to make the dog appear, the decoy dog, appear 30 feet away. So my dog won't bark because I have already determined he only barks when dogs are 20 feet away. So I'm going to have my dog appear, my decoy dog appear 30 feet away. My dog will remain quiet because I have arranged the antecedent, so the behavior I don't like, that reactivity doesn't happen. And then my consequence might be that my dog gets a bunch of treats, okay? And then I'll slowly change the antecedent and say, okay, now we're going to be 25 feet away, now we're going to be 20 feet away, now we're going to be 15 feet away. So you really need to understand the antecedent behavior consequence of what's happening. And we have loads that we are going to come out with even more information on this in the Academy because the ABCs, understanding the ABC is huge. So I'm going to add a fourth tip, right? So first we had use distraction, mark treat, use distance, understand the ABC. And my fourth tip for reactivity is that you have to set up practice scenarios. So what I think I see a lot with owner trainers is that we try to fix a behavior on the spot. Like we wait for the behavior to happen and then try and fix it. But that isn't really going to work. It's not going to work for most things, but it's especially not going to work for reactivity. So for reactivity, if your dog barks at other dogs, we'll just stick with that example, then you have to set up, you have to stop taking your dog into public, you have to prevent your dog from seeing other dogs at all, and you have to create lots and lots of training sessions. Okay, you have to create training sessions. Now remember, if you guys have questions about reactivity or focus or anything, throw them in the comments because I'm going to get to the FAQs here in a second. But the really brief overview is that you have to understand your antecedent behavior consequence. You have to start far away from the decoy dog, and you have to set up training situations because you have to know when the other dog is going to appear. You have to be able to control things or you can't fix the problem. So with reactivity, we see people try and rush it a lot because they want to be able to take their dogs to public. But you're going to have to temporarily stop that, and you're going to have to set up training sessions. So you might find a friend who has a very calm dog and ask her to come help you until the problem, until it's going better, that kind of thing. So when we talk about reactivity, when we talk about focus, there are a handful of questions that we get the most often. So I'm going to start going over those. And if you guys have any questions, throw them in the comments. And I wrote them down on my bright pink Post-it note before I left the office so I wouldn't forget. So one was that we have a few questions about treats. So for example, my dog won't take treats in public, or my dog won't take treats around a certain distraction, or my dog won't take treats, fill in the blank. And if your dog is having trouble taking treats, then I really want you to watch the live web class we just did on Friday that is going to talk about the Premack principle. And in there we talked about the transfer of value and getting your dog to take treats as if it was a behavior. And treats and reinforcement is what we are going to really be talking about here upcoming in our next set of lives, is using reinforcement as effectively as possible, because you can actually use reinforcement and it not be terribly effective, or you can use it and you can have it just skyrocket your training. So we're going to be talking about reinforcement very heavily. But if your dog won't take treats, you need to train it like a behavior, and we talked about that a lot in the live web class that we just did on Friday, so you can find the replay on the page. So Tiffany just mentioned that the ABCs make sense, and she tends to only think of the B and the C. So yes, you have to understand, you have to control the antecedent, you have to control your environment. And what I forgot to say is that you can control the environment, and it's extremely important that you do so. But remember that it's the consequences that actually drive the behavior. So behaviors happen because of consequences. All organisms behave to make something happen. That is the reason that behavior happens, is to create a change in our environment. Behavior serves a function. So consequence, antecedent, you have got to control it if you're going to fix a problem like reactivity. But you have to understand that there is always a consequence at play, or the behavior would not be happening. So that's just my little side note there, because when you made that comment, it reminded me I wanted to say that. Okay, so your dog won't take treats. You really want to think about the PREMAC principle, transfer of value. Check out the web class we did on Friday. Stay tuned for our next series of lives, because we're going to be talking about that a lot if you're having trouble getting your dog to be motivated for you. Okay, so then we always get questions about fading treats out. We get that one a lot. And we get it in the context of focus and reactivity. And so what I'm going to say is that there is a process for fading treats out, and that is a process I am happy to explain in a separate live. But if you're still struggling to get focus, you are not ready to fade the treats out, okay? So fading the treats out is something that we do. There is a process for that. I have told you guys before, when we take one of our puppies into public, we'll go through a cup of food in 15 minutes. When I'm working with like one of our advanced dogs, he might go through a cup of food in a whole day for training. And so, but there's a process where we go from, 20 treats a minute to 20 treats a day. There's a process for that. So don't jump the gun on it either. If you're struggling with focus, you're not ready to fade the treats out. You're just not, okay? And then occasionally we get the questions from the raw feeders, those of you that feed raw food, because when we talk about reinforcement and working around distractions, one of the things you're always hearing us talk about is that you need to make sure that you're using the right reinforcer, which might mean using a higher value reinforcer. And so our raw food feeders always want to know, what can they use as reinforcement, because their dog's food that they get for food is very, very valuable. So for the raw feeders, and this is not the time or the place to talk about diet per se, but for raw feeders, there are a couple things to keep in mind. One is that we actually have people who choose to take their dogs off the raw diet and go back. Oh, are you still there? Okay, I think so. My feed cut out on me for just a second, but it looks like it reconnected. So, okay, for the raw feeders, we do have people who choose to take their dogs off a raw diet and put them on a kibble diet temporarily during the training process. So for 6 months, they may take their dog off the raw food and feed them kibble for the training process. We also have people who will train for raw. Now that's very hard to do in public, because you can't really feed your dog raw chicken and then go handle anything in public. But you can train for raw foods, especially like at home or during training sessions. So a lot of what we'll tell our raw feeders to do is go train outside. Go to a park, go to a parking lot, train there where it's okay for you to be using your raw food for treats. But keep in mind, if you're going to do that, there are, of course, safety things you need to consider. You need to wash your hands. You need to not touch things. With raw food, there is a very real risk of things like salmonella. So if you're going to use it for training, you need to do so using common sense and safety precautions, just as you would when you cook with it in your own kitchen. And then the other thing that we tell people is that use the freeze-dried treats. Those usually go over pretty well. And if you're a raw feeder and those tips don't help, then you want to tune in to the next handful of lives where we're really going to dig into this whole idea of reinforcement and how do we really, really harness it to push your training forward. Okay, so then we get questions about things like, how do you know when to quit, and how do you know when your dog is ready for something harder? So we're all, what happens if you're doing a training session and your dog starts to bark or your dog starts to get distracted? Do you quit the training session? When do you quit the training session? Things like that. So, and on the other hand, when do you know when your dog is being successful enough to move forward? So for the when to quit, just because your dog barks doesn't mean you necessarily have to quit. You can always move further away. So perhaps you're in a parking lot, and as you get closer to the store entrance, you lose your dog. He becomes distractible, he barks, something like that. You can always go back to your car and start again. You know, you don't have to quit just because one mistake was made. But you do have to try and save it. So if you go back to your car and your dog is still all over the place, not focusing, not paying attention, then it may be time to quit. When do you know when your dog is ready to move forward? Well, when your dog is being successful. The official rule is when your dog is being successful 80% of the time. Then you know you're ready to increase your criteria. So if your dog is being successful 50% of the time, you stay where you are. And if your dog is being successful less than that, then you make things easier. So perhaps I am I'm in the parking lot and I'm standing next to my car, and 80% or more of the time that I say my dog's name, click, or ask for a cue, he responds to me. If he's doing it 80% of the time, we're ready to move forward and we might get closer to the door. If he's doing it only 50% of the time, we're going to stay where we are. If it's less than that, we're going to try and find some way to make it easier. So we define success as a dog who is responding to our marker. So if I click and my dog doesn't look at me in order to get his food, then he's not being successful. If he's not responding to his name, offering eye contact, or responding to known cues. So those are kind of the ways in which we define success and that our dogs are ready to move forward. And that's something you get better at the more that you train. Okay, and then we get questions about what age do you need to start this training, when can you take your dog into public, things like that. Focus training should start as soon as you bring your dog home. So you should start training your dog to focus around distractions as one of the very first things that you teach him as soon as he's old enough to eat food and you have him in your possession. So if your dog is 8 weeks old, start at 8 weeks. Whether you leave the house or if you just create distractions at home is something that's up to you. So the question about when can you bring your puppy outside or to new environments or into public, stuff like that, that's where we get into that vaccine debate, which I'm not going to talk about now. Talk to your vet. There are lots of varying opinions about when it's safe to bring your puppy places like the park or a parking lot or something like that. For public access, you're going to stick to only pet-friendly locations until your dog is mostly house-trained and responding to known cues. So once your dog understands to walk nicely on a leash, sit, lay down, responds to his clicker, and is well-focused, then you can move to non-pet-friendly locations. But the thing is that there are a lot more pet-friendly locations than you might think. So there are hardware stores tend to be pet-friendly, hobby stores can be pet-friendly. You, of course, have Petco and PetSmart, stuff like that. So if you're having trouble with focus, the first places you're going to practice when you start going into public would be somewhere like a pet-friendly hardware store. So that's where we take our puppies for the first time. When we're ready to take our puppies into public, the places that we go to when they aren't ready for non-pet friendly stores is we go to the Gander store here is pet friendly. We have a couple of hardware stores we visit that are pet friendly. Tractor Supply is pet friendly. And then we have a store near us that doesn't mind us bringing our puppies in. So those are the places that we use until they're well behaved and house trained in those environments, if that kind of makes sense. And then the last question that I have here, unless anybody has any other questions that they want me to answer, is this one came up on our live on Friday when we talked about the pre-mat principle and we did our web class on Friday, is what about the distractions that happen to you? Okay, so if you're out doing a training session and you are doing really well about staying far away from your distractions and then you're slowly moving closer and you've done a really good job of controlling your antecedents and your consequences and all of this stuff, and then a distraction happens to you. So either people keep coming at you even when you've asked them to stop, somebody appears from behind you. You all know, like the people that, I think the question we got on Friday was sneaky people, the people who kind of are just all of a sudden there. So how do you handle that? Yeah, Christina, sneaky people. First of all, take yourself away. It is totally okay to say, my dog is in training. I'm sorry, but I need to take him away and calm him back down or something like that. It's okay to remove yourself from the situation. You also want to train for that. So inside our academy, we actually talk about this specifically, but how to train for people who just kind of sneak up on you or whatever. And you want to create training sessions for that. Start with friends, family members, but actually, stand in your yard and practice having people walk at you, come up from behind you. You can practice all that stuff before you go into public. And that's one of the big things that perhaps that should be the theme from today's live, because I've said this a couple times now, is you need to train through these problems in a controllable situation, not in the moment that it's happening. So it is completely something that you can do to practice having people come up behind you and kind of sneak up on you and stuff. That's something that you want to practice before and you're still going to have problems, but you want to practice that as much as you can outside of actually being at the mall. And then the other thing to remember during all this stuff, guys, is that in a perfect world, you would control everything and you'd never have a mistake and your dog would never have a problem. But we don't live in the perfect world, and you're going to make mistakes, and your dog is going to make mistakes, and there are going to be distractions that you could never have predicted. And sometimes it happens. And so forgive yourself when it happens. If you're in public, somebody sneaks up on you, your dog starts to bark, remove yourself from the situation, try and fix it, but just forgive yourself for it, because it is going to happen, and it's going to happen throughout your dog's entire career. So if you have any other questions on focus, throw them into the comments and we will answer them, even if you're watching the replay. And starting next week, I've got a whole bunch of new live topics planned for you, all about really making your reinforcement work for you so that your training can be efficient and effective and everything like that. So if you liked this video, I would love it if you would like it and share it anywhere that other owner trainers may find it helpful. And if you have any questions, throw them in the comments, even if you're watching the replay, and we will answer them for you. And I will see you guys next week, where we are going to really start diving into reinforcement and how to really, really harness it so that it's something that's really working for you. So I will see you guys next week.